Hello and welcome back. So today we'll be going over potential rookie targets this year. Now, this comes with a lot of caveats and things to discuss. We'll cover that in the intro, but this video should give you a better idea of which rookies are given the best opportunities this year to become fantasy relevant. My goal for this video is that every one of these guys at least makes their NHL team, because that would look pretty stupid if some of them get sent down. So just to start off, rookies are usually not fantasy relevant. And even if they are fantasy relevant, that doesn't mean they're going to be a productive piece on your team. So in a 12-team league, you definitely don't want to take a shot on a rookie unless it's your absolute last pick and you're ready to drop him to the waiver wire and use that spot to play the schedule. So usually rookies are drafted outside the 192 picks in a standard 12-team draft. And the odds of you drafting a rookie and then keeping him on your roster for the full season and having that player produce enough for you to make it worth it is extremely rare. How rare? Well, let's take a look at this rudimentary analysis that I did over the summer. It was going to be a multi-year study, but it just became very difficult to find ADPs and drafting positions for certain guys over the past number of years. But what you're looking at is the most fantasy relevant rookies last season and where they were picked. So what you notice here at the top, this is the ADP. Only a couple of guys were actually drafted in most leagues. This is their pre-rank according to Yahoo. This is their end rank according to Yahoo. This is the difference between the ADP and the end rank. And then if they didn't have an ADP, this is the difference between their pre-rank and their end rank. So as you can see right off the top, the only two guys who finished in the top 100 on this entire list are goaltenders, Jeremy Swayman and Jake Ottinger. And if you remember, Swayman had played a couple of games the previous season, so he had given a little bit of a sample size. He had a .945 save percentage in that small sample size the year before, so there was a lot more hype going into this season for Swayman, and that ended up showing a higher pre-rank and a higher ADP. I couldn't find his ADP at this point because they've switched over to 22-23, so if anybody knows where I can find historical ADPs, that would greatly help me out. As far as Jake Ottinger is concerned, he was drafted pretty high, considering the fact that he was the fourth goaltender on the depth chart in Dallas. So he obviously didn't start the season as their number one. He was behind Holtby, he was behind Bishop technically, he was behind Hudobin, and then he ended up taking over the net over the course of the season. So he did provide excellent value later, but he was also available on the waiver wire at points during the season last year. I picked him up at a point during the season, a little bit of a lull towards like the January, February point of the season. And Swayman also spent time on the waiver wire. So even though you're drafting these guys, and even though they did hold up well and they ended up with a decent rank, they did spend time on the waiver wire. Now, the only other guy who was drafted that I didn't have an ADP for, but his pre-rank was 174, he ended up at 135, is Zegras. So he actually held up his value pretty well, and that's relatively rare. But we will come back to that when we're talking about McTavish here. So we'll come back to that in a couple seconds. Now, obviously the best performer was Mo Seider, but he was relatively undrafted. So he was pre-ranked 337. And unless you were one of those guys who loves rookies and took a shot on him last year, you probably didn't get him in the draft. You probably got him off the waiver wire, which is what you're supposed to do with rookies anyway. So he started at 337, ended at 37. So he jumped quite a bit. Obviously, this puts him as like the number one rookie, maybe in the last 5 years or so, in terms of production and fantasy value. And then Sean Durzi down here, he broke out late, and that was due to an injury to Drew Doughty. So he did jump quite a bit, but he was within that. So anything in this column that's green is within the top 250, which basically mirrors fantasy relevance in a standard 12-team league. So a lot of these other guys, Lundell, Mercer, Jarvis, Boldy, Tomasino, Sillinger, Podkolzin, none of these guys crack the top 250 in terms of production. And if they're not going to do that, you don't want them on your team. Now, the most hyped player coming into last season was Cole Caulfield, and he actually performed pretty well in the second half of the season. But because of the first half of the season, his end rank was 275, and he was unable to reach that fantasy relevant spot. But more importantly, if you drafted him at 101, he ended up hitting the waiver wire. So if you found him on the waiver wire and you wanted to take a chance there, then that probably paid off for you in the second half. Drysdale saw a similar type of thing here. He got drafted at 195. He ended up 253, just outside, or the pre-rank was 253, ended up 306, so just outside fantasy relevance. And I would expect something like that to happen to him again this year if he's not quarterbacking that power play. But the point here is that it's very, very difficult to draft a rookie in your draft and have him be productive enough for you over the entire season to warrant that roster spot that you could potentially give to somebody else. Now, the only reason that I would ever do this is in drafting a rookie is with that last pick and knowing that if they don't work out right off the bat, I'm just going to drop them to the waiver wire and play the schedule. But, in a deep league, if you're in a 14, 16, 18, 20 team league and you need some high potential, high upside late in the draft, taking a look at rookies might not be the worst thing in the world. Especially if you're looking at, a tweener, third, fourth line type of veteran player versus an up-and-coming rookie with a good line assignment. So let's take a look at some of the rookies this year. And now we're going to go in descending order from my favorite rookies to my least favorite rookies. And my number one rookie this season is Andrey Kuzmenko. And I have to give all the credit to this to Jared in our Patreon group, who's been keeping a close eye on Kuzmenko in training camp and opening my eyes to this file. But he's a transfer from the KHL, so he's more NHL ready than some of the 18 to 20-year-old rookies. In addition to that, look at what he did in the KHL last year. 53 points in 43 games. That was second in the league behind Vadim Shipachev, so very productive in the KHL as well. In addition to that, apparently Kuzmenko was promised power play time in order to sign in Vancouver, so that may or may not have happened, but now with the injury to Brock Besser, I would definitely expect him to be on that first unit. And he has been on that unit in preseason. He looked very good. The other night, he had 3 points by the end of the first period, 2 goals, and one of them was on the power play. So he's looking like he's going to get a top 6 role. He's looking like he's going to get elite PP1 time with some of the best power play players in the game, JT Miller, Elias Pettersson, and Quinn Hughes. With them snapping the puck around and him down low, I could see him racking up some power play points as well. So he could be a very interesting fantasy option. And one of the things about rookies is they're not very consistent. They're young, so you see it in flashes, but you don't see consistency. But with Kuzmenko, he's a pro. He's been playing for years now in the KHL. He's 26 years old, so he's a little bit older. So he may be able to keep up whatever production he starts off with more for a longer sample size than a typical rookie. So that's why I'm looking at Kuzmenko as my number one rookie off the board, because he is older. He has the pedigree. He's been doing it in the KHL, and he's going to get a great line assignment in Vancouver. Now, the rookie that I have the most confidence that will have a smooth transition to full-time NHL minutes is Mason McTavish. Now, the eye test will tell you a lot about this player. He's very skilled, extremely competitive, reliable in all areas. But this comparison here is why I'm most confident about his fantasy stats. So if you look at it, Trevor Zegras, in his World Junior before he entered in the NHL, 7 games, 18 points. And then you look at his rookie season, 75 games played, 61 points. So very productive. And if you look at here, this is the overall rankings for most points in a World Junior Championship. So if you look, Zegras was 12th overall, and look at some of the names. Alex Mogilny tied Trevor Zegras in points, or the other way around. But that's incredible. And then if you look at McTavish, he was 1 point below Zegras. So his teammate now, Trevor Zegras, excuse me, Mason McTavish will probably be given a decent line assignment in the top 6. Maybe he'll be playing wing to start off. But essentially, he had the relatively identical production in the World Juniors. He had a good start last season, and this year I would expect maybe not 61 points. That was a very good rookie season for Zegras, but I would expect him to be able to produce in a top 6 role, and he probably will get some power play time as well. So if you just look at the comparison here, some of these other players, obviously, Gretzky notwithstanding, he only played, at 16 years old, he put up this many points, which is kind of insane. But still, McTavish was a year younger and put up about the same amount of points as Zegras, so that could be something that will indicate that he has an easier transition to the NHL, and that's what you're typically looking for. But I don't think anybody here is sleeping on Mason McTavish. He's definitely going to be drafted in a lot of leagues this year, so definitely a guy to keep an eye on, but I wouldn't jump too high. Now, another player that I'm very high on in terms of rookies, now he's not technically a rookie and eligible for the Calder. He's played 6 games in two of the past seasons, so he's not eligible there. But He's a little bit older. He's at 21 years old. Drafted a couple years ago. He's had a couple of stints with the Leafs, including playoff time. So he has tasted this before. He just hasn't put it together at this level, mainly because he hasn't been given a shot in the top 6. And that's likely what he's going to be given this year. So if you look at some of their earlier line combinations at a training camp, he's playing with Tavares and Nylander. If he does that, then that's an excellent garden seat opportunity for Nick Robertson. I almost said Jason Robertson. Maybe he's a little bit more of a focal point this year as opposed to previous seasons, just given that top 6 role. But look at his career point per game in the AHL, 0.90 over the last 2 seasons. He had exactly a point per game last year with the Marlies. And currently this year, he's got 3 goals and 4 points in 3 preseason games. So obviously we don't want to put too much stock into preseason stats, but what it shows me is that he's finally ready for this role. And with the departure of Mikheyev, he could be given that role in a more consistent basis. So that's definitely a guy. If you get a guy who has exposure to the number 1 or number 2 offense in the league, that's definitely going to boost his fantasy value. And he, if he doesn't get that line assignment, he's still a good player in the bottom 6. But once he enters that Leafs top 6, that's where the fantasy value comes in. So monitor this situation during training camp. And if he does get that spot, he could be a guy to take off the waiver wire or jump on late in your draft. Now, one of the rookies that I'm most high on this season is Jack Quinn. So 8th overall pick in 2020. Last year turned some heads with his call up late in the season. He had a nice snipe. He had 2 points in 2 games. But he also had 1.36 points per game average in the AHL, 61 points in 45 games. So if you look here, this is the point per game numbers for the AHL last year. There were only a handful of guys that were ahead of him, and a lot of these guys only played, 2 games, 4 games, 8 games, 5 games. So the guys who, there's only 3 guys who produced better than he did for a significant sample size, and I wouldn't even count Tippett here with 12 games. So TJ Tynan and Podorowski, those are the only 2 guys that outperformed Jack Quinn last year, and Jack Quinn is still relatively young, so he's hopefully going to crack the lineup this year in Buffalo. And then on top of that, I want to shout out Lego Rocks 99 on YouTube for this factoid. If you look at players for U22 points per game in the AHL since 99-2000, Jack Quinn ranks 10th in points per game average. So if you look at some of these names, a lot of these were the lockout year. Getzlaff, Perry, Jason Spezza. But Jack Quinn, right up there with a lot of these elite NHL players. Kucherov, Bobby Ryan. Vetrano is not necessarily elite, but he did put up elite production for Providence in that season. So he's still, putting up pretty good point totals, historically speaking, not just in terms of last season. Now, Quinn's a pure goal scorer with a lot of offensive upside, and he's on a team where he'll probably be given more of an opportunity to succeed. And Coach Don Granato has he's done some wonders for Buffalo's younger players like Tage Thompson, Peyton Krebs. He revitalized Jeff Skinner's career, and of course, you can't forget to mention the development of Rasmus Dahlin. Damn, this is tough. My son's been sick for the last week, so my voice is shot. So this is getting tougher to do. It sounds like I've just been smoking 2 packs of cigarettes or something, but we'll keep it moving. Now, the next player I have is Alex Holtz. He was the 7th overall pick in 2020, and if you remember, he and Lucas Raymond were neck and neck in that draft, and ultimately Raymond went to Detroit 4th overall, but Holtz is right there with him. And then in 2021, playing for Frölunda in the Swedish league, Raymond scored 6 goals, 12 assists, 18 points in 34 games, while Holtz, playing for Djurgårdens, managed the exact same point total in 40 games, and he also added a goal and 2 assists in 10 games with the Devils. Last year, 2 points in 9 games with the Devils before being sent down, but he did average just about a point per game in Utica with a lot of goal scoring to boot, 26 goals in 52 games. That's really good for a player like him, a younger player in the AHL. The key factor in this file is the line assignment. So anyone playing with Jack Hughes is likely to rack up points, and in training camp, we've seen a line of Palat, Hughes, and Holtz, and they've looked pretty good together. So if he doesn't end up with Hughes, he may end up with Hischier, who's also productive and capable of keeping his production up. But if he's with Jack Hughes, that is going to be huge fantasy value for any Holtz owners out there in the fantasy world. He's the goal scorer. He's the trigger guy. Hughes is the setup guy. He also scores. And then Palat is more of like the grinder, the net front guy. So that could be a really interesting line just to keep an eye on in training camp. If he does get that assignment, I definitely want exposure to Alex Holtz. Now, with Cole Perfetti, if you look at the production at both the NHL and AHL levels last year, there's a lot to like. So 7 points in 18 games, 15 points in 17 games in Manitoba. Pretty good there. 10th overall pick in 2020. He has a very high ceiling because of his elite offensive skill set. According to JetsNation.ca, and then some preseason games on top of that, Perfetti is slotted with Dubois and Wheeler on the second line in a stacked top six. So that would be excellent line exposure for Perfetti. If you want exposure to this top six, he's going to be the cheapest guy to get. So there is a lot more risk involved there, but in terms of every other one of these guys is going to be picked in the draft. Maybe Wheeler falls a little bit, but still. If you want top six exposure, Cole Perfetti's your guy. And then on top of that, they got a new coach. Rick Bowness coming in. He's more of a player's coach, and you could see a decent bump in production for some of these guys. Dubois might be poised for a breakout season, and if he does, then Perfetti on his wing might be an enticing fantasy option as well. Now, with Kent Johnson, the 5th overall pick in 2021, the production last season was very good at the NHL level, very good at the collegiate level, and then finished 7th in World Junior scoring with 9 points, and he won the gold medal with Team Canada there. So the key thing to keep an eye on here, obviously you see he was over a point per game in Michigan, over a point per game in the World Juniors, but this is what you want to pay attention to here. If he's centering this line with Laine and Gaudreau, that is massive value for a rookie. Now, according to Natural Stat Trick, he leads all Columbus Blue Jackets in the preseason in 5-on-5 expected goals, 5-on-5 shots, 5-on-5 takeaways. So if he gets this line assignment, he could up being a massive fantasy option. And with his skill set, the playmaking of Gaudreau and the finishing ability of Laine, that line could be magic. The question is, does he get that spot? That will be the biggest determining factor for his fantasy value this season. So for Nils Lundkvist, if you look at the stats here, 52 games, 14 goals, 18 assists, 32 points in the Swedish League in 2021. He was the Swedish Defenseman of the Year. That was the year Mo Seider won the Defenseman of the Year overall for that league. So he was right behind him in terms of production and how well he played. Then last year, 25 games with New York, a goal, 3 assists, 4 points. He wasn't deployed the right way. He's a quarterback on the power play, and he was not used that way in New York. That's why he ended up in Dallas for a first-round pick. But when he's on that power play, he's able to score goals from the point. He's got an excellent shot, and he will probably be the quarterback number 2 power play unit, the guy who's running the show back there. In terms of what's going on there in training camp, I'd like to credit Dane Lewis of Locked On Stars podcast for his insight on this as well. But he could potentially end up on the top pair with Miro Heiskanen. I wouldn't expect that to happen just because of the play styles of the two guys being relatively similar. Lundkvist is a slight offensive guy just coming into the league. I would think they want Heiskanen with somebody more established, somebody a little bit more defensive, but something to keep an eye on. And if he is that PP2 quarterback, that could be a really deep league value play for a quarterback defenseman. So keep an eye out for Nils Lundkvist as well. Now, Marco Rossi went 9th overall in 2020, had a difficult battle with COVID that cost him almost a full season, came back last year, and then led the Iowa Wild in scoring with 53 points in 63 games. He is a center, and currently Minnesota's in a cap crunch. They need guys like this on entry-level deals to play for them, but the problem is he's a center, and they already have 4 centers that are better than him or at least established NHLers. In terms of, he definitely has more upside than some of these guys, but they've got Hartman on the first line. They've got Eriksson Ek as the second line center. They've got Freddie Gaudreau, and then they've got Tyson Jost, who's making a name for himself in training camp. Up until yesterday, he was leading the league in preseason points, which is obviously nothing that interesting, but he does have to fight his way for a roster spot. But Rossi did score a nice shorthanded goal last night for Minnesota, 2 nights ago, actually, by this point. I've been trying to do this for a couple days now. He's currently tied for 3rd in the league in preseason points, 4 points in 2 games. So yeah, not a lot of data on this file in terms of NHL experience, but good AHL numbers, and he has all the tools to be a very productive player, and they need him to be with their cap situation. So he will probably get an opportunity. It's just a matter of where. Will he play the wing? Will he be at center? How will that work out? There's a little bit of risk there. That's why he's a little bit lower on the list. But he definitely has the potential to break out, and he's on a good team. They have a good offense, and they should be able to continue production up and down the lineup this year, even losing Fiala. But up next, the next guy I have, he's a player I've been pretty high on in the past, and it just never works out because of the Rangers' inability to develop prospects properly. 1/3 of all Rangers first-round picks since the letter went out have asked to be traded or have actually left the team. So that's a really disheartening sign for a Rangers fan like myself. But he was drafted 9th overall several years ago by this point, 2018. So he's 22 years of age, and that may help his production. So he's already had 20 games in the NHL, 4 points, 2 goals, 2 assists. He also had a goal called back. I remember that. I was at his first goal game against New Jersey last season, or 2021, I guess it was. But last year for Tractor, 19 games, 13 points in the regular season, and then 10 points in 15 playoff games. So when the going gets tough, he actually does rise to the occasion. He's done that before in the playoffs for Tractor, who's usually an undermanned team. They're not one of the powerhouse Scott St. Petersburg type of teams. So for him to be able to carry the mail, 7 goals in the playoffs as well. And then this is the key. He's playing with Trocheck and Panarin. At least that's the indication out of camp, and Panarin has taken him under his wing. They're working on stuff after practice, working on their power play formation. He may get a look there. I highly doubt that, but they're working on one-timers, and he's got a countryman there in Panarin, a guy who's an elite skill set type of player as well. And I think that's kind of what Panarin needs. He doesn't need a Jesper Fast or Dryden Hunt on that line. He needs a Kravtsov or somebody like that that's going to be able to make plays. So if he does end up getting that line assignment, that is really interesting for Kravtsov, because anybody playing with Panarin is going to get set up for a ton of opportunities, as well as Trocheck. And Trocheck is a pretty good offensive player in his own right. So this could be an interesting file. And if you can get Kravtsov, I mean, there's no way he's going to be drafted this year. And there might be a chance that he doesn't even make the team. I highly doubt that would happen, because they'd pretty much have to trade him at that point. But right now he's slotted in on that second line right wing, and that's really good fantasy value if you can get him there. The last guy I wanted to go over, William Eklund. So 7th overall in 2021. The case to be made for Eklund making the team and having an impact is that their top offensive producers from the last season are mostly gone. Like the top 3 guys are there: Meyer, Hertl, and Couture. And Couture is a nice deep league play this year, by the way, because he's not getting drafted in the top 160. After that, Brent Burns was 4th. He's gone. Barabanov was next with only 39 points in 70 games. Then Erik Karlsson, and then Nick Bonino with 26 points. Rudolph Balcers with 23 points. He's gone. Noah Gregor, 23 points in 63 games. And then Jonathan Dahlen, and he's gone. So they basically have no scoring anymore. So there should be an opportunity for Eklund to get into the lineup. I would expect Eklund to make the top 9 at least. But the indications out of camp are not necessarily bad. They're just not necessarily that this guy's locked down a position. And he should be good, because look at this production. Very similar to Raymond and Holtz in terms of, playing in the Swedish league, putting up, half a point per game, or, a little bit around that range. 4 points in 9 games last year. Looked pretty good to start the season. So, the real reason he's this low on the list is just because the rumblings out of training camp haven't sounded overwhelmingly positive. I would expect him to be making the team, but with David Quinn and Mike Greer running the show, they know that this year is essentially a throwaway year, so they won't necessarily rush Eklund for the sake of trying to compete for a wild card spot. That could factor into it. And his line assignment hasn't been favorable in camp either. So he most recently played with Steven Lorentz and Nico Sturm. So nothing crazy there, but he has all the talent in the world to make this happen, and there's going to be an opportunity for him in San Jose. San Jose could be a good place to mine fantasy value, because nobody's going to want them this season. So just to summarize really quick, finally made it through this video. I've tried like 15 times to record this because it's just really difficult sounding the way I do. Don't draft rookies in a 12-team league. Look for them on the waiver wire, but these are the guys you can look for on the waiver wire if you're looking for rookies. If you're in a deep league, look for rookies once the veterans are starting to look less enticing, and a high upside rookie could be better for a short period of time than a third, fourth liner, full-time NHLer. So, just one of those things to balance. Taking risk later in your draft is definitely where you'd want to take that risk. And then monitor training camp for all line assignments, because this could change a lot between now and the start of the season. So if you're targeting a guy and he's getting a good assignment, make sure he stays there for the regular season. But if he does, some of these guys have some really enticing line assignments, and they need, a lot of teams are struggling with the cap. And they're trying to get some young guys in there. So that could be a good opportunity to mine some fantasy value as well. I'm going to shut up now and drink some hot tea. Thank you for staying with it, and I will see you in the next one.